Today we have a Commodore 2040 dual floppy disk drive. This particular unit doesn't belong to me. This belongs to an acquaintance that I met recently who has had this drive for a long time but no longer has the PET to go with it, so he's unable to test it to find out if it even works. So today we're going to do the due diligence and do a full checkout on it before we try to turn it on. As I always say, study before the smoke test. Just like the PETs, these units are hinged in the back, and to be honest, I've never actually opened one of these up before. Haven't used one of these since high school. There is a floppy disk in one of the drives, and oh my god, that is dusty. 2 screws here, one on either side. Doesn't look too bad as far as corrosion goes. Definitely needs a cleaning though. No washer on that one. Push that back there so it can rest against the wall. The main logic board up here on the lid looks to be in pretty good shape. It's very clean, but that's because it's been upside down all these years. The analog board here is really dirty. That is really bad. I wouldn't even want to try to turn it on with that level of dust in there. There's a lot of dust in the mechanism over here as well. So I'm going to do a full visual inspection, try to clean things up a little bit, and then I'll do some power supply checks before we try to turn it on. Let's start by taking out this analog board. The heads on these things look stripped out, or maybe they're not Phillips, maybe they're hex. And we lift it up, clean on the bottom. This is going to need some compressed air and some scrubbing. This isn't just dust, this is some kind of oil residue. It's definitely clinging to the board. And the back side of the board actually isn't that bad. There are no vent holes here. And this other analog board was right underneath these vents. The date codes on these chips are all 1979. So looks like the system was made in 79. Drive mechanisms are really dirty, and I will take those out to clean them eventually, but I'm not going to do it just yet. I cleaned the heads, and I checked the felt pad on both drives. For now, I just want to get to the point where I can check it out and make sure the system turns on, recognizes motor spin, that sort of thing. I cleaned the analog board by blowing it off with an air compressor, and then I also rinsed with distilled water and then used the air compressor to blow all the water out. I'll leave this to dry for a while since I don't plan on powering this part of the system up just yet. I want to start with the power transformer disconnected, and then I'm going to check the AC voltages here coming from the transformer. If the AC voltages here are good, we'll plug it in and we'll check the output of the voltage regulators on the main board. According to the schematic here, we have plus 12 VA, plus 12 VB, two 12 volt regulators here, 7812, both of them are 7812s. Here we have VR3, LM329, that outputs to 5 volts. We have AC voltage here on pins 1 and 2, 17 volts, and on pin 3, we're looking at 7 volts AC. These feed into a rectifier and then into the 5 volt regulator. The 12 volt regulators are fed from pins 5, 6, and 7. Between pins 5 and 7, I'm only seeing 1.2 volts AC. Between pins 6 and 7, I'm seeing 16, nearly 17 volts AC. And like I said, I don't have a service manual. I don't know what these voltages are supposed to be, but they should be sufficient to feed the regulators. This connector here should have 5 volts on pin 1 and pin 2 should be ground. So let's switch to DC voltage and turn it on. We have 5 volts. We have 11.7 volts on pin 3, Close enough. And pin 5 should also be 12 volts, 12.08 volts. So from what I'm seeing, the voltages look fine. Okay, voltages on the AC side are fine. Voltages on the DC side are fine. Analog board has had sufficient time to dry. Everything's reconnected the way it should be. So here goes the smoke test. The lights come on for a second and then go off. There's no motor activity or any other sign of life. But to be honest, I don't remember if that's normal or not. The service manual says that if there are certain failures in the diagnostics, the lights will come on in different patterns. But there's a combination of 3 lights that can tell you what the problem area is. The lights are off now, so I'm assuming it's okay. So here's the setup. Everything's connected. Currently have a problem with my 4032 and that the screws that hold the keyboard in are all stripped out, so I'm working on repairing that. This floppy disk that came with the drive is not going back in there. The dust on that disk could destroy the heads. So I have a disk here labeled PET programs, something left over from my high school days. First things first, power on the disk drive. Lights come on for a sec, go off. Power on the PET. Since I was never lucky enough to have one of these disk drives myself in my youth, I'm sure I knew this stuff in high school where we had a computer lab full of these things, but I've forgotten it all. So pull out the handy Commodore Basic Reference Manual, Appendix 1, Commodore Basic Disk I/O. So here goes nothing. Let's put in our PET programs, drive 0, and type in directory D0. Motor activity. I've got a ready return list. Either it read nothing, didn't give an error. It's supposed to direct to the screen. Let's try drive 1. Hopefully we're not ruining the disk. Directory for D1. The heads are clean. I'm just not sure about the rest of it, obviously. There's a lot of dust in there. And based on the symptoms, it seems likely that the problem is one of the mechanisms. They are pretty dirty. So I've taken one of the drives out, and I'm just checking the belt. And these fabric reinforced belts still seem to be in pretty good shape. Test fitting a disc in here. The felt pad is definitely making contact. Can feel the right protect sensor clicking here on the side. These are shoe guard mechanisms, and to my eye they look very similar to the Apple Disk 2 mechanism. I decided to take a look at the mechanism in operation, make sure the head positioning motor is working, that sort of thing. I don't see a track 0 sensor in here. So let's do a DI D0 and see what happens with the heads. They are moving. Motor spinning, heads are moving. They appear to be positioning track 0. They are moving a bit, but they're not returning any data. So it turns out I'm just a noob when it comes to these old Commodore drives. The 2040 and the 3040 don't have a system in the firmware to automatically detect a disk. So, according to some information I found, you have to initialize the disk every time you put a new disk in the drive. This is not formatting the disk, it's initializing. What it does is aligns the read head with track 1 and reads the block allocation map into memory. The firmware on the drive holds the stuff in memory. It doesn't check the disk for it every time. So if you swap out a disk, it'll never know, and it'll try to write based on the block allocation map it has in RAM. So what you have to do is initialize the drive every time, like this. I for initialize, 0 for disk 0. Now it's aligning with track 1, reading the block allocation map. Now we can do a DI D0 and actually get a directory. How about that? I didn't have the initialization command listed in the Commodore Basic manual because it's for version 4.0. These drives were never intended to be used with version 4. These drives came out with the PET 2001 and Basic 2. I have a couple of Commodore factory disks just to check the head alignment. Make sure the central hub aligns there properly. Initialize 0 again. And check the directory. 1541 test demo disk. So it's still pretty dirty inside. It needs a thorough cleaning, but other than that, doesn't appear to be anything wrong with it at all. Thanks for watching.